and yet the number of people in a home has declined over that time. So we've seen the household size is the purple decreasing line over that time period, and the average home size here is plotted. So you can see the average number of people in a household has come down from about 3.5 or a little more than that to about 2.5 over that time period. So fewer people, but more square footage implies more energy, more building materials put in. Another dimension of our consumer culture is just the commonplace extravagances. Things like outdoor grills that cost more than $1,000. Things like luxury cars and the prevalence of really expensive cars. The SUV market. Things like cosmetic surgery that are just very common nowadays. Even things like orthodontia that 50 years ago or 80 years ago weren't nearly as prevalent as they are now. Many of these things are the types of consumption that are things that have positional dimensions to the consumption. And I'll get into this in a second. Another important part of consumer culture is our interaction with media and information flows. Economists don't usually emphasize the importance of our media in terms of our consumer habits, but psychologists have emphasized, and more economists are appreciating, how the information we get day to day, that information set conditions our choices and frames the things that we consider good economic outcomes. We've seen a wide increase in television viewing. 40% of adults' free time spent on television viewing. Amazing. But the informational content is that television shows on average tend to skew people's ideas of what consumption is to higher levels, and portrays rich people and upper middle class people on TV shows. And higher television viewing is correlated with higher spending and higher levels of indebtedness. At a macro level, we are living beyond our means. And it's also interesting to note for each of these high-income OECD countries, they all are suffering with a savings problem. But the U.S. is suffering with the greatest savings problem. This is at a macro level using the national accounts data available from the World Bank and the IMF. But you can see that there's a declining trend over time on net national saving, and that the U.S. is the lowest in 2005. I don't have the all OECD number for 2005. And you can look up these kind of figures at the World Resources Institute website. There's a wonderful data portal there that will give you all kinds of figures related to these economic figures, along with a lot of energy use and environmental figures. Another dimension of consumer culture is the increasing dispersion in the income distribution. And in a study with Chris Ranney at Cornell, she and I looked at this issue in New York State over a 30-year time period using census data. This pattern holds up nationwide. It holds up in Illinois. And what we're seeing is, over time, the people that are at the lower end of the income distribution are seeing very little growth or no growth, whereas the people at the upper end of the distribution are seeing dramatic increases in their incomes. And some of it is kind of two high-powered earner couples that are highly educated in the economic power in that household compared to two poorly educated people or one poorly educated person with some kids at the lower end of the distribution. Some of it's that. Some of it's the very different returns to education and some specialties over this time period, but we've seen great increase in the dispersion of incomes. Other characteristics, the savings thing holds up at a personal level, and the debt also holds up at a personal level. I've already mentioned the time use. Now I want to talk a little bit about evangelicals and some of their attitudes. And there are a number of definitions of what an evangelical is. I'm going to use a strand of Protestant Christianity which emphasizes a need for personal conversion, born again. spreading the gospel, biblical authority, and the saving death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Numbers, there's a debate about it. The Barna Group uses a pretty conservative estimate in the U.S., estimates it at 8% of the U.S. population, or 20 million people. The U.S. Statistical Abstract uses a broader definition based on church affiliation and puts it at 28% of the U.S. population. So very different definitions in play. And I know some of my sociologist and political scientist friends could go on at length about the merits of different definitions. I'm not going to belabor that point here, but what I want to emphasize is some research facts about what's known from survey research about evangelical attitudes on the environment. Here's a couple of quotes from the Barna Group, which really does nice survey work about population trends, and they have categorizations of religious affiliation and affinity. They say most devoted Christians see no connection between their faith and recycling in one of their 2002 studies. And then in 2007, they wrote, overall 60% of Americans stated that the investment in environmental protection was absolutely necessary over the next 10 years, while only 35% of evangelicals, the lowest of any group examined, felt this way. So a very significant difference in attitudes and priorities over public investments for the future in this group. Here's another study that's 2007 that looked at diverse views on the environment from the Barna Group. And I think this one is really telling. They had people rank what they thought major problems were. 33% of the evangelicals thought global warming was a major problem, whereas compared to non-evangelical born-agains, 55%, notional Christians, people that just have a loose connection with their faith, 59%, other faiths, 62%, atheists and agnostics, 69%, so a real striking difference there. And then on the agreement with the statement, absolutely necessary to invest in environmental protection, I already mentioned the 35% for evangelical Christians, but look at the other groups, about twice that for most of them. Recycled products, higher for some of the other groups, especially the other faiths. Percent of U.S. population, you can see that to get a feel for those. So on that measure, some pretty striking differences. Why does that happen? An interesting study by Bud Kelstead and some other authors in the Journal of the Scientific Study of Religion in 2003, where they surveyed pastors in churches that are affiliated with the Willow Creek Association. Some of you might be aware of that association of churches. So these pastors could be from a non-denominational church, like my own church, or a denomination that is evangelical, or a mainline denomination. And they grouped the pastors into these different groups in their survey. And then they asked them, do you feel, they asked a lot of questions. I'm just going to discuss their environmental findings. Do you feel close to environmental groups? And you can see the difference between the mainline denomination pastors and the non-denominational or the evangelical denomination. So that kind of attitude about closeness to environmental groups like the Sierra Club or Nature Conservancy. Attitudes about what the federal government should do to solve social problems. And then ask people whether their church sponsors a food pantry. And then compare that to whether their church sponsors an environmental program. Very different. Now some of this might be because of difficulty of thinking of what kind of environmental program to offer or be involved in, but I think it shows something about the evangelical mindset and worldview and theological position that we need to discuss and think about.